Hello, John.
No, whatever.
And so today we're going to talk about stained glass and the protection of stained glass in churches. So when a church is deconsecrated or sold, what should happen to its stained glass windows? Should they be preserved, relocated, or left in place? What is the ethical and spiritual duty we owe to sacred art? Catholic and Protestant churches have closed their doors in recent decades, some of them. Some are turned into homes, galleries, or community centres. Others are demolished. Yet inside these buildings lies something irreplaceable, and that, of course, is stained glass, sacred art that was witnessed by generations through prayer, baptism, mourning. So does removing stained glass, John Malone, from a consecrated place dishonour its purpose or protect it from decay and neglect? Is it not an integral part of the building that should be left in its place? What do you think?
It is, yes, because first of all, a lot of the parishioners, when they didn't have much money, paid for some of these stained glass windows, which would have been expensive at the time because it was this Henry Clark, and
Harry
he
Clark,
was
yeah.
Hardy Clark, beg your pardon, and he was renowned for the composition of stained glass windows, and there was one or two other ones that was renowned as well, but he was particularly renowned in this country, and I think he did some abroad as well, and his windows are in some of the important cathedrals in Europe, believe it or not. He was that well known, and because we had a vibrant Catholic faith in this country in my time and in previous times, people would have remembered it, and I certainly remember churches being packed, and for three masses of a Sunday, 8:30, 10, and 11:30. And then on Saturdays was confession. But stained glass windows in a church were often an indication of the people supporting this and giving a it it helps the spiritual welfare of the people that would have been attending mass in these churches. I'm talking about Catholics primarily because Protestant churches, to my way of thinking, didn't have stained glass windows. I never saw a stained glass window in a Protestant church, unless, of course, it had been originally a Catholic church. If that's the case, they would have stained glass windows. That's the only reason it would have them in a Protestant church. Now, and of course to have them in Christchurch Cathedral in Dublin and St. Patrick's, which were originally Catholic churches, but they haven't given them back to the Catholics as yet. But
Hmm.
the Christian TV will be demanding that as a right. They were taken over during the Reformation period when churches were destroyed and all that. But these two gems weren't destroyed because they had such a history attached to them. Anyways, we're talking about stained glass windows in churches now that are being closed because of the lack of people practicing the Catholic faith and leaving their souls in grave danger of eternal damnation. Because practicing your Catholic faith is a duty and a gift of your baptism, your Holy Communion, your confirmation. But if you turn your back on that, you make that decision, you'll be held responsible for it. And Jesus said many a time during his life on this earth about hell and about people need to sort of prepare for eternity by way of prayer, and that we were doing little video, we were doing little items ourselves on that subject. So we're talking about stained glass windows. They should be left in situ because they were put in there for a purpose, for the particular the way it was designed. I mean, there was a lot of thought went into that. It wasn't just something willy nilly. They're perfect fit, and they're often over behind the altar. Lovely big stained glass windows depicting our Savior Jesus and his life on this earth and our Blessed Mother. There's often a story attached to them. We have it in our local church here in Saint Bridget's Church, and now the parish priest has called it now Saint Bridget's and not Saint Albert because Saint Albert, of course, is the 400th anniversary of his birth in 1625. So doesn't time fly? Anyway, the stained glass windows, no, they should be left. And that the churches are consecrated, the Catholic Church are consecrated. They should be kept open, to my way of thinking, and they should never be closed, full stop. because there are people that go to them, and it's time when they start doing things right, not emptying the churches the way they have done with the policies that they pursued, deluded, believe it or not,
Well,
quite deluded.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's you've just inspired a new video there actually. A funding model to keep them open perhaps would be a good idea, but we'll come back to that another time. But anyway, I suppose look, the thing about the glass in the churches is I view it personally as sacred. And I think like, that the light comes through the glass. You've all these beautiful religious figures. The figures tell a story. It's part of our heritage and it's an integral part of the building. So I think they should really, every effort should be made that if a church is deconsecrated, that
It should
that
never
this,
be deconsecrated, full stop. A Catholic church should never, it's been consecrated. The altar, as there's often relics in the altars, every altar in the Catholic church has relics of saints. That's one of the pictures, because when the priest is celebrating mass, he's there in Christo. He's there in the of God, of Jesus. He's there. He's been ordained, and it's a great vocation to have. And priests, the altar is a very important, and of course the altar was uh, beside. Where the lovely marble was, and the priest faced the tabernacle and said mass and churches piped. Now, when they did all the changes with the priest turning his back on the tabernacle, which he always, it's not a good thing to do, to turn your back on the tabernacle. A priest, that's the center of the whole thing. And so the tabernacle is there. The stations of the cross are there, where people would have said the stations of the cross, and the people paid for those. The same as the people paid for in some ways, with the seating which they have, which costs a lot of money and time and that. So before any of this bit nonsense of deconsecrating it, this is something that should never be permitted. And the Christian TV Ireland takes a very poor view of that attitude. Churches should be kept open, because people will always use them for weddings, baptisms, and confirmations, and so on and so forth. Where are they going to go for that if they're trying to practice their Catholic faith?
we
The message wants to be preached loud and clear, and Catholic churches need to be kept open, full stop, and not this nonsense that they're coming out with, these bishops. They'll have to answer for that when they meet their maker, believe it or not.
they will
That's
indeed.
their responsibility. They should never do such a thing, because they've been consecrated, and there's the history attached to it. The people that got married in those churches, the last thing they want is for that church to be deconsecrated, and no record of their marriage and funerals and all the rest of it.
Now
I
you've
mean,
mentioned a
a church is
very
uh,
you've mentioned a very, very good point there, John, because I'll tell you why. My mother and father had their 50th anniversary. They got married in Donnybrook Church. Now, and they were able to go back there and meet the same priest 50 years later that married them. Okay. They'll be go,
lovely.
yeah, 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 yeah. And of course, the passage of time had taken place, and they were all much older than they were. And he was delighted, and he told everybody in the church that was there, "Oh, I married this couple many, many years ago, 50 years ago. They're here today." And everybody was coming up, shaking their hand, and it was the most communal thing I'd seen in a church in all my years, from childhood to now, right? That people were coming up to my parents, okay, and they were saying, congratulations, God bless. And they were shaking their hands. The whole church came up to shake their hands to say, you did it. You stayed together for the 50 years. You're still together, and here we are,
a,
50 years
a,
later
a
in the
great
church.
a great testament to the durability of the marriage, and
Yes.
the fact that it took place there and the priest was still there. So that was a gift from above, and people appreciated it. So that's an example. The same thing happens in other churches. So the bishops just want to wake up from whatever is wrong with them,
Yeah.
and keep those churches open for people that have getting married and their children make when their first Holy Communion. That I mean, they want to go to the parish church where they were used to going to. And even if it has dwindled, they can preach the good news. We'll be preaching the good news when we get going, and we won't be encouraging anybody to be closing churches. And we'll be calling them out if they do such a thing. A church being consecrated, and the parishioners paying for a lot of the things in that church by way of the stations at the cross and all the rest of it. They paid when they didn't have much, and so it's not right for churches to be deconsecrated. I never heard you can't do a thing like that.
Yeah. I
People got
think,
married.
I think one good idea would be, and I can think of it straight off the top of my head now, would be that um, we have enough technology with artificial intelligence now, okay, to recreate the inside of a church, right, on a virtual world. And in other words, you can, I'll give you an example. My ex-partner, she was a UX UI designer, and she used to work for, I think it was Boeing or Airbus or one of them, okay? And anyway, she used to design, you'd put on a headset, this is virtual reality, right? And she used to put on, what she used to do is she used to design the cockpit of the airplane in a 3D world so that when you put on a headset, it's like as if you're sitting on the plane in the plane, right? And
Yeah,
and then you learn that it's for training the pilots how to fly the plane and how to land. So her job was basically to create Paris Airport, Dublin Airport, create the inside of the plane from a UX perspective. Okay. And so that you would think when you put on this headset that you're sitting in the airplane, all the controls, all the clocks, everything is the same. You turn around your head backwards and you see there's fire extinguishers behind you. It's as if you're sitting in the plane. So I think they could do the same with churches. These churches that maybe are changing through times. As I know you don't want deconsecration of churches, but unfortunately, it's happening. So I think they could create an AI version, artificial intelligence, a kind of a virtual reality of the church before anything is done to it. But I don't agree with taking the windows out of the church. I think that's
I don't
sacrilege.
agree with churches being closed.
Yeah.
They perform their purpose, and uh, because of the changes that they made, they emptied the churches. Let that dawn on them, because I'm long enough in the tooth to know when churches were tight and we didn't have much in our pocket. But you were expected not to put coppers in the page. You were expected to put silver, so you could put a tuppenny bit that was silver. And there was that to it. And the parish priest and boy, he used to sit in the port when you were going in to see what you're at. So I
Ooh.
mean, he was often criticised for that, but funny enough, I had murdered as a young person that he was taking the whole thing serious. And but people look, churches were packed. Now, if you change things too much, the way they did, and they had no right to do it, they leave things the way they were successful. So there was some peculiarity going on that we know nothing about, and the changes they made was disastrous,
Well,
disastrous, and they have a lot to answer for. So my, irrespective of this businesses, churches are changing, and because churches have to be closed. As far as I'm concerned, no, no, no.
no,
The
no, no,
people
says John Malone.
no, they should never be closed,
He should never
and
be closed.
it's up to those that have this authority, these bishops. They want to exercise it properly and keep the churches open and encourage people to save their immortal souls, visit the church. Come out with something for goodness sake. We'll be doing it when we have to when we're going with a TV station. We'll be helping people to save their immortal souls and not be humping and hawing and all the rest of it and closing places where people go in and say a prayer. I visited many churches when I was going down the country in the middle of nowhere, and churches was open. There wouldn't be many there, but they were open and they're still open. I often visited there to just take time out to and not be at this, when I was working for myself and doing a food product for
Now,
the dogs and cats.
we did mention before, and we mentioned it once or twice, that there's a whole economy built around the church. The government should be encouraging the Catholic Church to have all the people in there because one, it'll solve a lot of mental health issues, and two, it creates an economy of the Sunday economy. Everybody goes to the news agents after mass. They buy the newspaper. They
Right,
go into the
yeah, we
pub,
used to do that.
and then they get food. So
Right, yeah, so it's a whole thing. And but you see, if you don't preach the good news, like just what you're spoken about, then people won't hear it, and they're not preaching the good news. I
no.
don't hear them doing that by way of preaching the good news and about the churches and keeping them open. There seem to be, they want to nearly close them all for some reason or other, wherever they're suffering from. Closure mentality, as far as I'm concerned, and they want to wake up from the slumber that they're under and start acting and encouraging people to save their immortal souls and keep those churches open so that they can go in and say their prayers and start encouraging them to go again. They've taken a vow of silence. They might have been a monastery for all I don't hear them saying anything about anything except negative stuff.
Now the thing
Get enough
is,
of that on the news.
you said there, you made a good point. The slumber that they're under. I heard you say that there a few seconds ago. That's a very, very good phrase. The slumber and the tuppenny bit. These are things that are sticking out.
I mean, I know all these things, and this experience, and younger people wouldn't know that, but I know from what I can hear about in the United States, the only growth area is the Latin, as the Mass celebrated in the universal language of Latin. Now, they don't seem to be able to use that phrase, the universal language of the Catholic faith, Latin, because I learned Latin in my leaving cert and I was very good at it, honors. So, like, it was, you could, priest could converse with any priest in any part of the world in Latin. And people could follow the mass. It didn't matter how poor you were, you might have a missal. It didn't cost much. And sometimes the parish and all the rest would give it one to a person, assuming that they could read. But the priest often gave a good sermon. They didn't call it homilies them times, they called it a sermon, encouraging the people in the practice of the Catholic faith. There was none of this pussyfooting around. And then you had missions in every church once a year
Hmm.
to encourage the people, and church was packed. Then you had the women's and men's and women's fidelity. So you've done away with all this, and not alone that took out the altar rates that people paid for. So you can't do things like that. And these bishops have a lot to answer for that did that. I wouldn't like to be in their shoes
John
because of what
Malone,
they did.
I,
Put them back, put them
I,
altar rails back, and keep those churches open and stop that old nonsense about people say their prayers and encourage them to go back to the churches for goodness sake.
John
They're not
Malone,
preaching
I
the
will
good news.
say to finish up, I will say that hands off the stained glass and let the light shine through.
Correct. And keep those churches open. Full
And keep
stop.
those churches up. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much, Oliver.